Stephen, let's do some deep diving here into HTML5. Everybody, you should be here in just a second seeing the agenda. We're going to be talking a little bit about HTML5 and responsive design, and CSS3, how it is your HTML5 ally. Also about why you need JavaScript, and some tips on using JavaScript, useful HTML5 templates to use, and then we're going to take a look at some sophisticated HTML5 code and some real-life examples and see how that works. Does that sound like a plan, Stephen?
That sounds like a plan.
All right. Well,
all that within an hour.
Well, you know, it's all about overwhelming people with tons of content, isn't it? So we are CIW. We're your web and internet certification. So if you're wondering who are these guys, we are what we are to the web is we deliver everybody the skills that they need to know: internet skills, SEO, social media, web design, and development. We're vendor neutral. We use open source and the best vendor applications as judged by industry. And as a result, we're globally accepted in the industry. We have people worldwide who use us. The idea is that CIW prepares you for your career. We focus on job roles, and we put you on a lifelong learning path, not a vendor's product treadmill. Well, I suppose you might want to, some of you might want to know a little bit about the background of the two guys talking to you. So I'm President and Chief Certification Architect of Certification Partners. I've worked with technology for decades now, and as a consultant and an author for Linux Magazine, various presses, including Elsevier, excuse me. I've also worked as a security and social media consultant. Stephen is our certification specialist. He's our man in the field, an outstanding author and educator and presenter. He helps me design certifications and courseware as well. Stephen, tell us a bit about yourself just for a second.
Well, pretty much, James, just like what you've commented on. I do a lot of work with the CIW program. I work with individuals who are in education, trying to help them get the right program mixed up with the standards that they're using, and assist them with getting CIW up and running within the classroom. Also run some professional development programs, which I'm very fortunate right now. We're running several classes, including one currently going on in HTML5 and CSS3. So love to talk about CIW and work with you, James.
Fantastic. It's good to be here, and I want to welcome folks from everywhere. We've got comments, people coming from Glasgow, South Africa, Minneapolis, so we have a truly global audience. Well, everybody, let's talk about the concept here in regards to HTML5 about responsive design. Responsive design. It's one of the big terms that's used these days, isn't it, Stephen? And, oh, go ahead, man. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, it seems to be that really hot potato buzzword right now, you know, because there's so many different types of platforms. It used to be, James, that we would say, I've got this great website. Hey, that's great. And then we saw, you know, this market explode with mobile devices having access to the internet, and so it was, you know, hey, I've got this great website. Oh, and I've got this great mobile website too. But how does that website look on a BlackBerry, James? How does it look on your Droid phone? How does it look on your iPad? And who knows what other mobile devices that are out there with a web interface? And then how are we going to get that website to look good in all of those devices?
That's right. I think that's the key. And the whole idea, and by the way, I don't want to know how it looks on a BlackBerry, but I do want to know how it looks like on a on an iPad or on my Android, on the Samsung that I've got. But the whole idea, Stephen, like you said, is that you want to have pages that respond to a user's environment and also to a user's actions. And it's kind of by analogy. Back in the day, a website did e-commerce, or a website was a fancy billboard, and then it turned into social media where interaction was two-way. And that's kind of what's going on here when it comes to responsive design. You create fluid layouts that respond to a user's environment, whether it be a tablet, traditional desktop, their iPhone, and also it provides an app-like response to various forms of stimuli, in other words, end-user interaction. So you can create fixed and fluid layouts when it comes to responsive design, of course, and the idea is that large screens probably like that fixed way of doing things, but you want fluid layout for small screens. Examples of fluid layout. I always say, Stephen, you and I will talk about this, that you really can't define something unless you can give an example and use it in a sentence. So go to bostonglobe.com after the webcast, or go to clearairchallenge.com. Those are some examples of responsive design as judged by industry. The technologies and techniques used. CSS3 media queries, and you're going to see some code here in just a second about what media queries are in terms of CSS3. The short point, the short way that I like to talk about media queries is basically that using the technologies available to you, CSS3, JavaScript, basically the web page it can start asking the device accessing it, what's your resolution? What kind of platform are you? And then your web page and even your website can respond accordingly. Does that sound fair enough, Stephen?
It does, James. It's not the end all. I mean, let's just say, we're going to talk about some other things here. It's not the end all, but it's a good place to start. What type of environment are we using to view this page, to view this content? And then based off of that response, that feedback, we can then, have style sheets or style information that does it. Your other points that's in there, about the JavaScript, how we can use JavaScript to supplement or to react with CSS and HTML5. And then I think that last bullet point that you had on the slide there, James, where we're using our own creativity. More precisely, I would just have to say it's probably more of the planning, the design that's important that's in there, because we can code out a lot of things within our page, but it's a design issue. How do we plan it out for the environment that we're going to be viewing this in, or the possible environment that we're going to be viewing in? And if we put the planning in up front, we save on the design time.
You got a really good point, because when it comes to planning and design, you're doing much more when it comes to responsive design in HTML5 than just designing a page. What you're doing is you're now becoming in many ways a developer, because you've got to now work on concepts such as program flow. Okay, because now you're using JavaScript, you're talking about a sequence of events and how to respond to them. So now your HTML5 page is much more than just even better eye candy than before. It really is a true application.
Exactly.
And this is a post-PC technology, or at least post-PC approach. So you can't think of design just in terms of a web page or a desktop. You've got to think about it in terms of many different types of devices. So with HTML5 and responsive design, you can reuse data as well, because you kind of have an app-based application now, and you can adjust to high-definition screens that are more and more common all the time, as well as the number of pixels. So it's up to you and your creativity to understand how this works. I thought I'd show a typical example of kind of non-predictive design. You'll notice here, if I can circle my mouse here a little bit, you've got a width is 100%. There's some code here where you have the HTML body, and then you've got the header. This is just an example of your typical kind of non-predictive design. And here's an example of something that's a little bit more predictive, where it's basically saying, well, look, we've got a device here that might have 320 pixels and 480 pixels. This is all fine, because now you're starting to say, well, there might be some smartphones in landscape and in portrait and some iPads, and if you look at the code here, you can see that the developer or the designer has done a pretty good job trying to predict how it works. Well, let's talk about how CSS3 and HTML5 kind of becomes your ally when it comes to responsive design and beyond. So let's first talk about CSS3 and borders. There's a couple of different ways, right, Stephen, that we can mess around with with borders, and we can use WebKit and Mozilla type properties when it comes to HTML5. What do you know about these, Stephen, when it comes to these border radius values?
Well, how cool was it, James, when we first came in and saw some content on a website that was in a rounded box? You know, like, wow, how did they do that? And then you go in and you play around.
How could they do that? Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, we're doing table structure, right, with some JavaScript with graphics to round the corner, and that was really cool stuff. Then we came in with CSS, where we were supporting, you know, based on the engine. For instance, for like the Mozilla, you know, we're doing support for obviously our Mozilla browsers, or the WebKit for Apple and for Chrome browsers, where we could go in and specify, you know, our radius for the actual corners. And this has worked very well. Of course, we were pretty much ignoring Internet Explorer browsers. And it would just show up as square corners within here. Now with CSS3, we're taking these values and we're actually not necessarily having to rely on specifying WebKit border radius or Mozilla border radius. Now we can just use border radius in CSS3 and get rid of the browser-specific issues. We can use individual corner specifications in there as well. So you could have border top left radius, and then, you know, we can give it a value. We can specify the actual radius for that corner. We could do it for all four corners individually. Or, you know, you could leave out, for instance, if we did not mention the bottom right radius, it would be the same radius then as what we had specified for a top left for the opposite corner. But this is a way, again, of shorthanding in code that we can specify for our rounded corners without having to go in and include, you know, if we're doing a Chrome browser, if we're doing a Firefox browser, having to individually key them in, if that makes sense, James.
Right. Yeah, it does. It has to do basically, it makes your particular page much more responsive as we go. So here's some example, an example of some CSS3 with responsive design. It does a little bit of work, basically showing that now you can set your HTML, you know, major document at 101%, which opens the door to allowing constant resizing. And so you can you can define your body tag, your H1, H2 tags as you wish. And this is, I think, an important thing when it comes to cascading style sheets, the CSS3, that version, is that you can then define exactly what is, as it were. You can define what H1 means, what H2 means, etc. So we wanted to get into some code here to show people exactly how this can work and how you can set your body, set a background, and define the H1 tags as you wish to go. There's another set that we set up having to do, and this does a little bit of media query action as well. Stephen, let's talk a bit about this, because notice the @media sign there, and that is basically the beginning of a media query, is it not?
It is, James. In CSS3, we can specify, we can really start to address the type of media that's being presented. Those of us play around with CSS1, CSS2, you know, we kind of saw an introduction to the media style, where we could say, you know, browser or screen, excuse me, and print, things of that nature. Now we can, you know, really drill down into specifying how we want styles to be used based on the size or even the device. There's some styles out there we can use with the media for, you know, specific to the iPhone or Apple products. But we can also, what we're seeing here on the screen is with our media, we're talking about only screen, so we're going to be looking at our our output within our browser window, max width 740 pixels. So 740 or under, we're going to use this style information. We could also be turning around and doing it, saying a min width, meaning that we're a minimum width of 740 pixels will use a particular style information. So we've really got control over the type of style for information that we're having based on where this information is being viewed, on the screen or print or whatever.
And so this is what this graphic is meant to show on the right, is the idea that with the same code you can adjust to many different environments dynamically. And also based on user input. And here's a sample layout showing basically where you have your typical header, navigation, and then the actual article with a figure, and then you've got a footer for the information. You can put your links in there or whatever you want to put in there. And the way that you can enable that layout with CSS3 is defining what the page looks like. And you can also do media queries here, of course, and you can set your layout for your page, for the article, for the figure. And as you use cascading style sheets, this is where you then position the document. This way you're freeing up the HTML5 to do descriptions of the content and also for reuse. Because remember, pages these days are more than just things that we do resize. You're now taking that data and you're going to use them from page to page or use them from application to application. So I wanted to show how a particular page works with the cascading style sheets. Stephen, let's move on real quick and talk about the concept of transitions and how that works. We've got an example here having to do with transitions, and we have a WebKit example, and we also have an article example. What do you have to say about this particular piece of code here?
Well, James, again, we're talking about how we can focus in on individual sections of our document. Again, going back to our planning, how do we want that to render within different types of screen sizes? And so by using, for instance, your mouse down feature, we're talking about lining up our content within the specific window based on size, one column layout, two column layout, or resizing the actual content so it's viewable.
Also noticed that there was a comment, or not a comment, it was a question asking, what browsers are compatible with this? And one way to answer that is in talking about with these transitions, you'll notice the top code has in it, it says WebKit-transition near the middle of the code. The next one will have WebKit, but it will also have MOZ transitions. So these are basically for HTML5 enabled browsers. For Firefox, that's Mozilla. WebKit is going to be things such as Safari, also I believe Chrome. So the idea is that we can get you a link asking specifically. We did a webinar here. When was that, Stephen? Back in November, introducing folks to HTML5, where we did, I think, a real good job describing how how you can find out which browsers are specifically available. Suffice it to say, your modern browsers from Opera to Chrome, one or two versions back, will do a pretty good job supporting HTML5. Not all elements, of course, are going to be supported in all features, but you're going to be pretty safe. And it's very important to test your code constantly, of course. So when
James, you also have to take one thing you have to look at is basically market share of browsers, and by far right now Chrome is leading the way as the most popularly used browser, with Internet Explorer falling way behind. So the majority of the people that are on the web now are using Chrome, Firefox, Safari to some extent, and Internet Explorer well down the list. And Internet Explorer 9 and above does a decent job of supporting CSS, and 8 and lower, which there's still plenty out there. That's where you run into your backward compatibility issues.
That's right. Now, what is your opinion, Stephen? We have a question from Jigar. I believe I'm not very good at names, but talking about media query, what's the best way to handle layout here for multiple devices? You can go with pixel or percent. I'm kind of a percent guy. What's your opinion on that?
You can use either one.
Yeah.
Most times, I'm seeing them being done when we're specifying out our border radius as being in pixels. Having
Okay.
the pixel layout for specific types of devices. And one of the things that is really recommended in doing right now is when we're doing our planning for our site in our style sheet, go ahead and specify out your border radius or for your different types of platforms. So if you're going to have an iPad in there, then have your radius in there for that, excuse me, your media queries for that.
Oh, okay. No, that makes sense. Makes sense. Stephen, let's talk a bit about JavaScript and just dive in here. I thought I would move on and talk about the other element of that HTML5 trifecta that we talk about in our site development associate course, basically with the trifecta being HTML5, cascading style sheets, version 3, and then JavaScript. I couldn't help myself because I named it this a particular webcast HTML5 deep dive. I thought, well, why not use my limited skills in JavaScript to introduce people to the concept of how you can use JavaScript to create a particular effect on a page. Looks like an image. This code here, you'll see the doc type there. I put it in all caps just to be ornery. Use a very simple HTML, very simple body, and then using the canvas element. Not only do I add in a note that says, hey, if you don't support the canvas tag, you're not going to be able to see this. But then using very simple JavaScript, I basically use the document element object in JavaScript to create a particular variable, and then to draw a red line. I'm skipping through the FF with the 4 zeros behind it, creates the red line, and then I draw a white downward diagonal line there. So it's a simple script. If your browser has JavaScript enabled, you'll see this, and I just thought I would start that out. It's a fairly hello world example, but I think it is an example about how you can use JavaScript to create what effectively would pass along to an end user as an image. What do you think, Stephen?
I think it's a great example and a fun example to do, as you're learning and playing around with the code. As you've mentioned before, that hello world type of coding structure that we're all accustomed with when learning a new language. But this is a fun little twist on it because you're able to go in and actually put in the code and then turn around and see your graphic that you're developing there. I think it's a really cool example.
So we want to talk a bit about the importance of working with JavaScript. For example, I know a lot of times HTML5 developers will use JavaScript and HTML5 to create particular links, internal links. So one way you can do that is if you have JavaScript, one of the first things you can do is set the ready function. And what's neat about that is it makes sure that the domain object model loads fully, or the page loads fully, so that your programming will then work. This kind of goes back to the point that you made about thinking through the coding, the point I made about program flow. And this is an example about how you can use JavaScript to set a particular internal link. Thought I would get into that. When it comes to HTML5, Stephen, I think a lot of people, in a sense, want to know, okay, James, we're going to go delve deep into this, and folks, you're going to see some pretty cool sites here. But we thought that we would show some templates. And this here is a very simple template that you could use that talks about, that is something that you can begin to use. You'll notice it starts with the HTML. It has a link to a style sheet, and then it begins to divide the pages up into groups. This here begins to show you how semantically HTML5 allows you to organize content. It also allows you to get going with the cascading style sheets to organize data, as we said earlier. an example here of a few template sites that I wanted to mention. Honkiet is pretty nice. One Web Designer works quite well. These are all sites that allow you to download HTML5 ready templates. Some of them sophisticated, some of them not. What's cool about some of these is that once you go there, they will ask you questions about, well, what kind of style sheets do you want to use? What type of features of HTML5 do you want to use? And then you can make your choices, and then you can download the template for you to start working on. It's a great way to get your work started. Do you use this sort of thing in your classes, Stephen, as you talk about HTML5?
That's interesting, James, because one of the things that when we're in our classes and we talk about doing is using templates. Well, one, if you're using a template, then a lot of times you're looking like everybody else in the group. But as far as learning the code and learning how to do different things, then using templates to get started with is not a bad idea, because you can go in and see what type of code is in there. You can go in and tweak that code and see what types of changes that you can use to make it. So yeah, I think within a classroom, using templates to start with and seeing, as an example of the code, works well. But as far as getting out into the design industry, obviously most professionals are they develop their own template that they're using and don't necessarily rely on stock templates.
And then companies what they will do is they'll start with a stock template, create their own, and that becomes the company template that you work with. So
right.
If you're an independent designer, you'll certainly do the same sort of thing. So there are a lot of generators out there that will do a very good job in showing how it all works. Well, let's talk about HTML5 code with some real-life examples, Stephen. I think we're going to start here with braindead.com. That's not braindead.com, I don't think, is it, Stephen? It's
no,
braindead.com, okay? And speaking of braindead, let me see. Yeah, let me see if I can share a particular web browser here, because we're going to take a look at some code here real quick, aren't we? With braindead. Here, let's see, that's Delphina. There's Braindead. So, Stephen, this is your particular example that you wanted to show. Show us what you got here.
Well, I've got just a couple of sites, James, and one is BrainDen, which is an educational site, which is basically brain teasers, to help stimulate cognitive activity, and it's a fun thing to do with students in the classroom. But on the back end of this, this looks good. This looks very nice in your browser, right? Well, there's a reason it looks nice in your browser, because it's an example of really good, clean code. And if you go out and you just look at the code in back of the site, it's commented, for one thing, which is something that we really stress as far as clean code. We can go in and we can see from the comments that's in here what the author of the code is trying to do and what they're doing in each section. So it's well commented and documented. The other thing about it is that when you had up the screen with the individual elements, basically the template for the site, it's well done. So, for instance, our navigation bar is showing really good example of code for the nav element. Same thing is true with the head element that's in there, or excuse me, in the head section that's in there. The language element is used correctly. Supporting for the different languages that the site is using or will support. For the style information, and then the nav element is using the correct information for the drop-down list for the navigation from the site. The article content section, where we're having the actual content being displayed correctly, and then the footer element. What information do we have in the footer, and how we have the accessibility navigation built in there. A lot of times people will try and put that information within another nav element within the footer, and so to me it's a really good example of clean code, of well structuring, and something that I would show to students saying, Here's how you want to do it. Notice how code is indented for readability. It's just a good example of a well-structured HTML5 CSS3 site. And you know, that's definitely something that I use as far as an example of good coding. Something for those that want to go out and take a look at it later.
Thanks, Stephen.
Okay, I had another site in there which was let's see, lost my
Oh, the next site is Delphina. Let's take a look at that one.
Yeah, okay. The Delphina site, and again, just as you know, again, James, this looks nice in your browser. Okay, so there's nothing really wrong there, so to speak. But what we do have with the site is just as BrainDen was a good example of code, you've got differences. Within this site. And so you could really put the codes up side by side if we were in a classroom environment and had the ability to do it. And we could see that there is improper nesting, really, of elements within the code itself. So, you know, it's also not really structured as nicely as the last site we were looking at. So, for instance, the header element contains our nav element in here, and it really shouldn't do it. They should be standalone.
Shouldn't be in there. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's just an example of basically things that we would want to stay away from within coding, as opposed to the other site. But again, it looked all right within your browser window. It served a function, or it renders, but it's not really when we're doing our design phase and our planning out, we would do a better job with restructuring our elements from within there.
You know, in taking a look at it, it's almost like this is something that was generated by some sort of application. You know, I mean, that it's code that probably wasn't done by hand.
Very well could have been. Very well could have been, and that very well could have also caused the mix-up in element structure as well.
Yeah, I think that's a fairly common thing to happen. So, Stephen, there's another application that you wanted to show, and not application, another website, and that was the 20 Things I Learned website. So let me see if I can show that for you here real quick.
That's fine. This is a project that was done by Google, and to me, and we don't have to look at the code in here. We can to show the complexity of it, but to me, this is just an awesome site that shows really what you can do with HTML5, CSS3, and JavaScript combined, and it gives you a website that is fully responsive, but then also uses a flipbook-like technology, or gives you that feel. It's just it's one of those wow sites that says really cool. This is what we're striving for, and from a developer point of view, the type of technology that's being used in there. It's the 20thingsilearned.com site with some really neat features of our web design technology. I just wanted to throw that out as an example of what is possible when fully used. Other sites I really like to use, James, I'll just throw this out there. I'm sure a lot of people in our audience have seen it, is the CSSZengarden.com site, which I use in my class a lot when we're talking about CSS, because it does show you the real power of CSS with HTML. So anyway, let's take a look at some of your examples, James.
You bet. Here's an example, folks, from IBM Developer Works that I like, because what it does is it allows real interaction with the user, much like Google's site. If you can see my, you can see my screen here. Hold on here. What it does is you have the ability with the script here, with the JavaScript here, it defines a function where you actually can allow a user to scribble directly onto the browser. So let's see if I can actually share this thing here and get that going. I'd like you to take a look at it really quick before we move on here. And the sharing seems to be a little slow here, but I think I can find it here. Let me know when you can see it, Stephen. You should be able to see. Ooh, almost. There it goes.
Yeah, we've got it.
Now,
yep.
And I don't know if you can see it here, but I can say something like this is an HTML5 deep dive. That's what I'm typing in there if I can spell. The idea is that now end users can type in there. I think it's a fun example of how you can begin to capture content in a creative way from an end user instead of the traditional HTML form or using some form of Facebook type app or whatever. You've got something that as a JavaScript and HTML5 developer, you can go ahead and do that. It's a very exciting page. As far as the purity of the code is concerned, it does a pretty good job as well of taking a look, and we can take a look at it here if I can actually show the code here. Hold on. There we go. Here's the source code. It is not as clean as the first example that you gave. I'm not sure many examples will be as clean as you have. But one thing that's nice here is they do a very good job describing their web page through the meta tag, which is actually important to do. And then it defines the coding very well and then uses external pages as far as additional scripts. So I'm going to end that there, and I think I'll come on back to the PowerPoint slide here, if I can find it. Yeah, there it is. All right, there it goes. So, and again, everybody's going to get a copy of this. Then, of course, there's the Mustache Game website that I think is a lot of fun. It's fun.
We're not seeing your. There we go.
Yeah, do you see that there? Okay. And what
yes,
I'll do
we do.
is,
yes, we do.
What's nice about the Mustache Game site is that there's really no particular business use for it. But what I do like about this website is it gives a very good idea of the creative things that you can do. They have a pretty puckish sense of humor here, and what you can do with this website. See if you can actually see it here. I've got a lot of lag going on here. But what does a really good job, you can drag mustaches as you wish. As a video goes by of your favorite people. I happen to choose Willy Wonka here, the original Willy Wonka movie back in the 70s. And so you have the ability through cascading style sheets and through HTML5 of moving around content as you wish, images as you wish. It's I think, a very creative use of it. And I think once you actually start looking at the business uses of these sorts of things, you can get just as creative. So go ahead, Stephen.
I was just going to say that's pretty slick, and yeah, you can start to see the business uses of it. Like, for instance, if you're putting together an outfit or extras, accessories that you could add to a car or something like that. It's definitely has a business use, but it's also fun to see too.
Absolutely. So these are, in fact, really good examples, by the way, of responsive design. Here's another one. It's the free poker clock. I'm no great fan of poker, but I do like the cleanliness of the design using HTML5, using JavaScript and the domain object model to call these things up. So they're not using images here. They're not using anything. They're using HTML5, and it's quite compatible. Lisa Harnish pointed out before anybody ever came on this morning how I like to use a Linux system. So I have a fairly goofy system in the sense that it's not a Windows or a Macintosh. It works just great. So there's a lot of cross-browser compatibility here. Also, very clean code. I like not only how they do things nicely with div tags, etc., but they do a very nice job sectioning elements off with the code. So I wanted to get into that. Another example that's less flashy. I shouldn't use the word flashy, should I, Stephen? That's less eye candy. Don't use that pun.
Eye candy is better. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, that's less eye candy oriented and does a very good job. Is Museum Sheffield. I spent about 6 or 9 months in Sheffield back in my youth, and this museum does a fine job with showing responsive design, and the code is also very nicely done because once again it defines elements such as the ability to scroll, the home page, etc., which gives the ability to reuse data. Like I really like that point, but it also gives a very good ability to resize content properly. You know, Stephen, I think it's important at this point, you know, as we dive deep into it, I think people will say, well, what about video in HTML5? And I didn't want to try to show video on this particular connection because it would be very jumpy and people really wouldn't see it. So I think it'd be good to delve right here into the code and check it out. What we've done here, folks, is shown a very simple page that allows you to provide video in various formats. HTML5 will allow you natively to stream MP4 as well as OGG Vorbis, that's another format, and additional media, web media. I'm kind of an OGG Vorbis fan or an MP4 fan personally, but I wanted to give you folks an example. This is a much more simple example, but it's something that you can drop right in to your well-defined page that you've created using cascading style sheets. Another example of embedding code is where you can embed, for example, YouTube videos. So if you've created YouTube, like our marketing department does up on our website, you can embed those pages very nicely using YouTube. Are you doing that sort of thing with your class, Stephen?
We are, James, because one of the really cool things when HTML5 first came out was the ability to actually embed video within, or audio for that matter, within an HTML5 document and help reduce the requirement or a need for plugins based on your product that you were using. And so, you know, one of the really basic things to do if we're just starting to learn HTML5 and CSS3, one of the biggest things we can do is, one, change our doc type to an HTML5 doc type that allows us to support HTML5 elements, right? And then use our video element or our audio element or even the embed element for putting media within our page. It's a really great way of getting started.
Absolutely. Well, you know, there are times when it's probably not such a hot idea to use HTML5, and one of the questions earlier kind of alluded to that. Don't use HTML5 when you don't know your audience and the browsers they're using, I think is the first point, okay? Don't use it when you know your audience is using older browsers or an older operating system that can't handle it. Case in point, and that seems kind of odd. It's like, well, James, come on, who holds on to old systems and uses old browsers? The answer is governments and corporations. Stephen, is that fair enough to say?
James, just a really quick example, and I won't mention the institution or the state even, but yes, I was in a classroom last summer teaching a class, and I was trying to show a couple of sites for the class that I was teaching, and the sites were based off of HTML5, and we weren't able to pull it up in the computer lab that we were in, and it was turned out, you know, we were still running, the lab was still running Windows XP systems with IE8, Internet Explorer 8, and we weren't able to take advantage of the HTML5 CSS3 technologies that the sites that I was trying to show presented. And then that, you know, brought up another discussion of how you can tweak different sites to support older browsers. But anyway, yes, those environments still exist, and that has to be taken into consideration.
I know environments that will disable in their browsers JavaScript by default, and there's no choice in the matter. Well, that limits you tremendously. If you want to get too fancy, if you want to create mustaches everywhere on your website, don't use HTML5, folks. In other words, use your judgment. While we all want to be creative, creativity also involves good judgment as well. And if you don't know JavaScript, don't mess around with it. In other words, and that's my wry way of saying it, learn JavaScript. You have the opportunity through CIW to learn it, for example.
But I'll also put in there, James, a really quick plug in there is that while you're learning HTML5 and CSS3, yes, you want to strive to learn JavaScript, but there are plenty of JavaScript libraries out there that you can pull from as you're getting up to speed that you could still fully implement HTML5, CSS3, and JavaScript with script libraries that are there.
Excellent point. Excellent point. Now, you can get started with baby steps on this. It's not like you have to be some sort of jQuery guru to get going on this, do you? You know what I mean?
Right.
That's the neat thing about it. So let's talk about some tips. I was talking to a guy named David Bell in Manhattan here a couple of weeks ago. David Bell is one of the marketing pioneers of web marketing. If anybody here knows DoubleClick or heard of DoubleClick before, they're one of the first to basically mess around with cookies. And I'm not talking about chocolate chip cookies or snickerdoodles here. They're one of the first to really invent cookies and to use that to track people. Some people say that's awful. Some people say that's what makes the internet go around, what have you. But David Bell was saying, you develop for mobile first and then size up for the desktop. Everybody's using their mobile systems. That's really, it's not the way of the future. That's the way things are. Also, work on cross-browser compatibility. And there are plenty of sites out there, including if you take a look in the chat window, I've put a few things up in there that will allow you to take a look at certain websites that will help you. Also in November, I think it was November, we did a webcast that talked a lot about doing cross-browser compatibility, and caniuse.com is a great example of that. Take a look at sites. Any good web developer or designer is going to be looking around. Make sure that you're not too busy or too trendy. Make your code fail gracefully. It's a very important concept. And use your HTML5 not just for eye candy, but also for semantic markup and data use or data reuse. What other tips you got for us, Stephen?
Plan. James, I really do put a lot of emphasis on planning out your site because it makes your design time, your testing time much easier to be able to go back and look for issues or to alleviate those issues to begin with. The extra time you spend in laying out your site, designing it, and thinking about your platforms, your visitors to the site, will definitely assist you in going in and doing the development work.
Absolutely, absolutely. And when it comes to planning or using your JavaScript or CSS3, we have a lot of resources that we've put together here. There's some websites that talk about HTML5 features, 28 of them specifically that you need to know, 10 jaw-dropping HTML5 and JavaScript effects. I think a couple of those 10 are jaw-dropping in my opinion because they're fairly lame, but that's okay. That's okay. Most of them are pretty good. The W3C site page about CSS3 browser support. Actually, it's not the W3C, it's the W3 Schools web site page. Does a good job of describing how that works. Then you have Creative.js, cross-browser, CSS3 rule generator, and another CSS3 generator. These are all really pretty good resources for you to use. And again, everybody gets a copy of this so you can take a look at it. Talked about this last time. It's a very good little resource. Here, it's called The Book Apart, and you can go check that out. But if you really want to get started, of course, CIW does a great job with our Site Development Associate course teaching you exactly how it goes. And if you already know your HTML5, take our Site Development Associate course certification, which does cover HTML5, as well as the overall development environment. Now, I'm going to forego any particular overview of Foundations and our design work. I'm just going to put the Foundations roadmap up there so everybody can take a look at it. That's what I mean by SDA, our Site Development Associate Certification course. And I want to see what kinds of questions are out there right now in the last, well, just about 10 minutes here. So I think we've answered quite a few of the questions here, but what kind of questions are out there, Lisa, that we can see if we can answer?
Well, sorry, James, I was on mute there.
Hey, no worries.
Several interesting questions. Some of the most recent questions, Chris Baer is asking, I'm sorry, Donald McLeod is asking if the boundaries between JavaScript and CSS are blurring.
They are, and that's really why Stephen would emphasize the importance of planning, because as you are messing around with the document object model with JavaScript, that document object model, of course, is being changed and defined and made more specific by your cascading style sheet. Stephen, care to elaborate on that?
I do, James, and I agree with that comment wholeheartedly. We're leaning more and more on CSS3 to basically structure our site. HTML is really, pure content basically, and there is a lot of overlap really between the two from what we used to do, with HTML back in the day, so to speak, for pretty much doing everything for getting our web page represented. We're doing more and more with CSS3 now, and it does allow us so much advantages to how that web page looks and feels and handles, so that we're using HTML really just to hold our content, and that's where I go back with my classes with that CSS Zen Garden website, because you just look at the HTML file and the content never changes, but yet you can pull up so many different designs where the content is there, it's the same, but what changes is the CSS file, and so yes, there is definitely a blurring of more emphasis on CSS3 almost.
You bet. Absolutely. And there's a question saying where somebody's asked, I've tended to favor jQuery over straight JavaScript because of its cross-browser support. How does the story change under HTML5? And the answer is it doesn't. That you can use jQuery just as easily with HTML5, if not more easily. So I want to make sure we're clear on that. When it comes to what other questions have you seen, Lisa? I see one question, what is HTML5 and how is it different from HTML4? When it comes to understanding it, we had an introductory class, or I shouldn't say class. These are kind of like classes though, aren't they, Stephen? We had an introductory approach to HTML5 and how the tags all work earlier, a couple of months ago. But the main difference is, in some ways, is that HTML5 allows for more simple markup, but it also allows for more creativity and the stronger use of CSS3 and JavaScript. That would be my overall answer to that. And if you want a good overview
of course,
how
HTML5 supports all of the basic HTML, XHTML elements that are in there, but then we've expanded its capabilities with broader, more precise elements such as the audio, the video, the navigational elements, which to me is a huge addition, simplifying structure for our pages.
Here's a question for you, Stephen, that was asked. What are your thoughts in the pop-up messages browsers display whenever JavaScript is used? Any advice for us on this? One thing I would like to clarify is that anytime JavaScript can be used without using a pop-up. But let's say if you use or want to use JavaScript to create a pop-up, is that good, bad, or indifferent? And to me, my initial salvo in this is that as you understand your audience and what their preferences are, you can do pop-ups, no problem. If you know your audience doesn't like them, then don't use them. So it's all about not just whether you should use them or not, it's whether your audience will sustain it. What are your thoughts about that, Stephen?
I back that up. I support that completely. Again, it goes back to the planning, knowing your audience, knowing your target audience, and what they will take. Pop-ups have a great advantage. We can use them for a lot of different purposes, such as when you click on your print view button for a document, a lot of times it'll open up within a pop-up window, allowing you to print the content from in there. Or off of a purchasing site, you're liable to get your receipt within a pop-up. So pop-ups definitely have a purpose. Obviously, pop-unders are things we want to stay away from.
Yeah. Well, you might want to define that real quick, just in case they don't know what a pop-under is.
Pop-under is that really nuisance window when you close out your browser window, you're done browsing for the day or whatever, and you close your browser window, there's another window that has appeared underneath or in back of your main window, and typically it's some sort of advertisement.
But wait, there's more. Yeah. Yeah. I love them. I love them. Ugh, yeah, awful. There's somebody asking a question about pixels for margin versus or padding versus small percentages. Stephen went into this earlier, saying that most developers seem to prefer the pixels because it gives more control over the size of the border. So you're still being responsive, but you're controlling how things work. Percentages can be a bit more dodgy because you're now not defining pixel by pixel. Personally, I like pixels, but it can bite you in the butt if you don't do it right. That would be my answer.
That's a great point, James, and I guess I need to go back and clarify my comment from earlier. If we're going in and we're using define it for our specific types of devices, then your pixels I still think is a way to go. But if we're not doing it for every single device, then percentages will give you some more flexibility. So that it could try to render depending on the type of device we're using, if we're not specifying out all of them. I may have just confused a whole bunch of people, but if you're defining out multiple devices, you know the type of devices that you're specifically designing for, then I would want to do pixels because the screen width that's typically going to be used on that type of device. But if we're not, if we're just putting out for mobile device versus tablet device versus screen or stand-up, then you may want to play around with percentages. So basically that shotgun approach.
No, it's one way to go about doing it, or two ways to go about doing it. There was a question about div tags, somebody asking about, I thought with HTML5 div tags were going away. One thing, but the code samples from the websites are full of them. Well, the div tag is used to section off content, and the reason why you will see it used still is HTML5 does support it, and also you still have a transition between traditional browsers and HTML5 enabled browsers, but the div tag's still valid. Anything to say about that particular point, Stephen?
It is still transitional. It is still in there, but we can also, even like for instance within our article area element within that section, we still may be dividing up specific areas within there using our div element for specific content areas. So yeah, we're still seeing it.
Absolutely. Well, now, folks, we're at the top of the hour. In the slides, they go over how CIW has tremendous amounts of value worldwide in terms of salary impact and how you can learn more about HTML5 by taking CIW. For those of you who have questions about taking a CIW exam, or as people will put it, writing it, we certainly have the ability to support people worldwide. I do want to point out that we have for next week, good heavens, Stephen, next week, I do want to point out that next month, in April, we're going to be doing a webcast talking about creating and editing graphics and movies, really hot, cool ones. So come and take a look at it. It's Wednesday, April 24th. You can register for this up on CIWcertified.com, the same place where you registered for this particular webinar. So go up to CIW Certified and you'll see it. You can also follow us today on various fora. So you can go to Twitter, you can go to Facebook, TinyURL, Holy Moses, LinkedIn, and you can ask questions, for example, to learn more about where you can go take a CIW exam. We have CTC online centers worldwide. We also have the ability to take exams and courseware, take exams in our View and Prometric testing centers worldwide. Here's the contact information so you can get a hold of us. Jay Stanger at certification-partners.com or S. Schneider at certificationpartners.com. You can also get a hold of Scott Acatino, our Director of Marketing, for information, for more information. So we're past the top of the hour. There are a lot more questions. I have no problem answering them, but I do, for those of you who want to get going and have another hour to spend elsewhere, thank you very much for your time. But let's go ahead and let's see if we can answer any other questions. I did notice there was one here talking about the it was basically about a lot of people asking about certifications and things like that, and that's great. You can get certified and recertified again. But I like there's a question here, is the use of forms more flexible with HTML5? Brian is asking that. We did cover that in the previous webinar. We could talk about it now. Yes, with forms in HTML5, you have a tremendous additional amount of forms that you can use. Most of them are supported by the majority of the web browsers, and you do have much more attractive looking forms. I've always found forms to be very clunky looking, right, Stephen? I mean, you've designed some very nice pages, and you have to use these ugly forms. But with HTML5, you've got some pretty good choices available. In our November webinar, I think it's November, does a good job describing a lot of those forms. Yeah, as far as recertifying, yes, you just take the exam again, or the Site Development Associate certification, and you'll be recertified as a current CIW member. So, Lisa, thank you very much for your time. Stephen, it's as always, it's fantastic to go over this tech.
James, I appreciate it, and thank you for allowing me to participate today. And hopefully, like you said, we covered a lot of material in a short amount of time today, so hopefully it provided some information or stoked some interest to find out more information.
Take care, everybody. Have a great one.
Bye, everybody.
Look forward to seeing you next month. Take care. Bye-bye.
Yeah. Thank you.